Welcome to the Rebekah Panepinto project. Today, I am very excited to host Zach Goldberg. Zach is an executive coach, the author of a 13K GitHub star book called the Startup CTO Handbook, and is the CTO of Gruntwork, where they are working on developing cutting-edge DevOps automation tools. Zach has been through several startup acquisitions and has served as the CTO of 7 different companies over the course of his career. As an executive coach, Zach helps the top 1% of tech leaders to build high-performing teams through his one-on-one coaching sessions. He has developed his content from his 15 years of experience as a tech company CTO, as well as the methods within his book, the Startup CTO's Handbook. On today's episode, Zach was able to share some of his favorite content from the handbook, but also the incredible impact he's making through Gruntwork. Enjoy the show. Zach, welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me, Rebekah. Pleasure to be here.
Oh, I've so been looking forward to this because you are really solving some cool problems that really impact the AWS ecosystem as well as the cloud ecosystem as a whole. Then you also have your book, the CTO's Handbook, and just all the other ways that you're impacting the industry. Like, it's kind of like you're an onion and I keep, but the more I talk to you, like, you did this and you did that, and you have these kind of followers on GitHub. So I'm excited to dive in today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be a part of the ecosystem. We solve a lot of very interesting problems, and it's fun. What can I say?
Great. Well, let's start with the Gruntwork work that you're doing today. No pun intended. You're serving as the CTO, helping solve DevOps problems. What is the unique impact that you guys are having to DevOps engineers through what you're doing at Gruntwork?
Yeah, Gruntwork is really a fantastic place because it's so grounded in using engineering to solve problems for engineers, right? So the foundation to Gruntwork's products today is really a tool that we've been building for over 10 years called Terragrunt, which is a automation and orchestration layer on top of Terraform and OpenTofu infrastructure as code. And so we continually make investments in Terragrunt to expand Terragrunt's capabilities. And we also have commercial products that are built on top of those Terragrunt capabilities to enable what I think is a pretty unique offering to scale infrastructure as code in the real world. We have a lot of footprints on top of AWS that span hundreds, if not thousands of accounts and who knows how many clusters. And that becomes unmanageable very quickly with just the base tools. And so Terragrunt and we are sort of uniquely positioned by being both, obviously we build our own commercial software, but we also maintain the open source software that our commercial software is based off of. So a customer comes to us and says, this is impossible with your commercial software. And we ask ourselves, can we develop that capability in the open source version, make it available to everybody, and then build on top of that? And that ends up being 75, 80% of our product development. And so it's a very interesting pattern, right? Where we're working with the open source community, we're pushing the boundaries of what's possible there, and then simultaneously packaging that in something that is available to the enterprise.
Well, and on the open source side, from what I understand, the usage has been like wildfire. Almost a third of DevOps engineers are at least familiar with the tool. So what better marketing than being something people are super familiar with and somewhat dependent on
Yeah.
without paying for it at first.
Yeah, it's marketing, but it's also, I think of it as it's near the cutting edge of the state of the art of DevOps, right? 15 years ago, it was all ClickOps, infrastructure as code didn't exist, right? And so, in the grand scheme of how does technology evolve, we're still really early when it comes to doing DevOps as code. And so, we had, CloudFormation and things like this, and then things like Terraform came later, OpenTofu, Terragrunt. And so Terragrunt is very actively developed. We have full-time folks in-house. There are other companies other than Gruntwork who dedicate full-time staff to contributing to and building on this software because it really represents, a perspective on the cutting edge of just what is possible in terms of automation and new abstractions. And so that's intellectually very fun, right? We get to talk about how should DevOps work, right? How do we model these real-world infrastructure problems in code and tools? And so being a part of that conversation is really a privilege. It's intellectually very fascinating. And from a business perspective, it's a great place to be building products on top of.
Mm-hmm. How have you guys so far been interfacing with the different cloud CSPs, Microsoft versus Google versus AWS? What does that look like?
I mean, Gruntwork's history, we service customers in AWS. We help customers onboard to AWS. The past couple of years, we've done more, of course, with both Google and Microsoft, their respective clouds. But I'd say, the bulk of the work we've done has been in and around the AWS ecosystem. All of the clouds are fantastic, and all of the clouds have their, let's say, points of friction. They're different, but it's, at the end of the day, our goal is to provide tools that advance the state of the art in general in DevOps. We have more experience at AWS. There are more offerings there, but we are working with and working on top of all three of the major platforms.
Are there ways that changes they could make in their business models and things like that you think could disrupt Gruntwork or DevOps as a whole in the next couple of years? Or
That's a really interesting question. You have to imagine Kubernetes has been a major disruption over the past 5-6 years as a sort of a cloud agnostic base layer, cloud agnostic-ish, depending, of course, on your implementation. From Gruntwork's perspective, the problems we solve are really, DevOps is hard, right? Regardless of the cloud. There's a lot of complexity. There's an enormous amount of nuance. It's also high stakes, right? So you don't want to be investing in a landing zone foundation that's not going to work for you 6 months down the road, or that your team doesn't know how to build on top of. So regardless of the offerings the cloud has, and I think history has shown that the major cloud providers will keep adding tools, right? It feels like every week, one of the major clouds has some new major service offering. And that is actually the problem itself, right? It's the size, breadth, and scope of the cloud. Like, unless AWS says, okay, we're going back to only EC2, right? Okay, everybody can understand that, and we're just going to deploy manually using, SSH onto an EC2 machine. That complexity will continue to be there and to grow, right? And so that, I think that leaves permanently a space for vendors, companies with tools like Gruntwork to help enterprises build and adapt to that complexity, right, in a way that scales for that business's needs and requirements. Having worked myself at a dozen companies over the past 20 years, also working with hundreds of companies via Gruntwork, everybody has their own unique constraints, right? Everybody uses the cloud in a slightly different way, or even a very different way. And there's sometimes that's just because some developer at some point made that decision. Sometimes it's structurally the nature of your business is you need these kinds of guardrails. You need this kind of architecture because that's how your customers work, or that's how your product works, or whatever. And so I think it's the unique ways that companies adapt the cloud to their workloads that creates this opportunity to provide tooling to make that easier and more seamless and more scalable, more efficient, so on and so forth. So, some businesses need 500 AWS accounts. Some businesses have just one AWS account. And so there's lots of push and pull for the way those things go.
yeah. And then when it comes to their marketplace, you have endless ISVs and other paths that you can go down to customize cloud however you want to digest
Exactly.
it, for sure.
Lots of people will sell you expertise.
Oh, 100%. You guys are starting to go down the marketplace path from what I understand, though. What has your learning been so far in being a part of that ecosystem and having this ISV go to market?
Yeah, it's a little different than the traditional, right? We ourselves are not, we're not consultants, or we're not the traditional ISV, right? We're selling the platform, the technology itself. We are, if you were to classify us, we look like a SaaS business by most metrics and by most perspectives. So that's been interesting, right? It's about working with the existing marketplace to demonstrate there's a different set of tooling to do this. You can hire, whomever from the marketplace, and they'll help you set up a landing zone. A lot of that will likely be custom code or custom infrastructure. Or you can work with a company like Gruntwork that has templates for pretty much everything, right? We've been spending more than a decade building these templates and building these tools and automations. So every implementation that's done on top of our stack, yes, it is customized, but it is customized with building blocks. So you're not rebuilding the foundations every time. And those foundations that you're using from Gruntwork are battle tested. They've been used hundreds of times before. We know they scale. We know they solve the edge cases. They've been vetted. And so that approach has generally been well received, but it is different, right? The idea of I'm going to build a landing zone on top of somebody else's infrastructure as code catalog is just not the norm from what we see in the marketplace today. People have generally been pretty receptive to it. And I think we're starting to see, a bit more momentum, because at the end of the day, it's much more efficient, right? We've seen quotes for landing zones for AWS that millions of dollars, many months of work for what Gruntwork generally does for, a 5 or 6 figure bill in days or weeks, right? And so there's a meaningful step improvement in efficiency, and that scales.
Well, and it minimizes risk too. I'm sure the barrier you come up against a lot of times is just maybe an unknown. If somebody's not a DevOps engineer that's interfaced with you on GitHub, like an unknown to the fact that you're tried and true, been there, done that, tested in so many different ways, so that the risk is eliminated because like been there, done that, this has been proven.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think we as a company are still new at this sort of thing.
Mm.
There are a lot of trust signals in the marketplace that take time to get into, Gartner reports and things like this. But we're moving in that direction and dipping our toes. If anybody at Gartner is listening to this and wants to work together, we'd be happy to. I think it's just a matter of time until these sorts of things are aligned.
Yeah, time and familiarity.
Hmm.
I'm sure once
That's
you get
the
in the
thing, right?
door. Mm,
Being a company that develops software tools, like we are a Terragrunt
mm,
company. That is what we know and love. And then the AWS marketplace is very much it's a business place. It's relationships, it's trust, it's brand. So for us as a team of engineers, that's there's a lot to learn, and that's a good
mm.
thing too.
Yeah, I think it's healthy. My CEO comes from a product background, and that's the area where he gets most excited to learn is now understanding the business side and just navigating the Amazon ecosystem because obviously they know what they're doing too, tried and tested. So as you align, then you just see accelerated success when it comes to go to market.
Yep. And it's honestly hats off to the Amazons of the world. These marketplaces are very clever.
Mhm.
The number of ways that they've identified, the number of opportunities they've found to add structure to value creation, right? That there is this marketplace, that there are these partners in the marketplace, and like they've really clearly iterated over a while now on exactly what these patterns are and how the marketplace works in general. Like nothing is perfect, of course, but it's definitely a very sophisticated system at this point.
I want to switch gears now to talking about your book, the Startup CTO Handbook. And it's been able to serve a ton of customers because you do executive coaching on the side. I'm sure it helps you day in and day out in serving Gruntwork as well. So tell us a little bit about the inspiration for that book and how it's been received by folks that you actually introduce the content to.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to chat about it. Um, it came from this sort of realization. I had been a founder or a tech leader at a handful of companies. And as I was talking about earlier, every company is different. And yet there are challenges that maybe the ultimate decision is different, but the nature of the challenge is the same, right? Every company has to hire people. Every company has to think about performance reviews and compensation. Every company needs organizational structure. Every tech team has to manage debt and balance debt versus building new features. So the answers to all of those questions will differ, but the fact that every company has these questions um, felt like there was an opportunity to capture best practice, right? And so, I sat down and sort of made a list of basically an outline of all the different areas where I felt every company had this problem. And then I asked a bunch of friends and looked through my own experience and other engineering leaders and said, what are the different ways that people have solved this problem and what feels like best practice? And that, through some iteration and a handful of time, obviously turned into what is the book today. So it's not meant to be read cover to cover. It's more of this is the kind of challenge I'm looking for in my business. Let me go see what are the range of best practice options that are out there, the frameworks that can be used to help make decisions. And it's, in some cases, it's opinionated. Like, yes, there's a right way to do it. But I think in most cases, my goal is just to present, like, here's a structured way to think about this problem, add some sophistication to your thinking, which will hopefully help you make the right decision for your company, knowing your constraints, the people involved, so on and so forth. And in general, I think that's been very well received. The book is available for free on GitHub. The community in general has reacted great to it. It's got, umpteen, 13 something thousand stars or whatever it is now on GitHub, which feels like a great signal that it's useful. It was inspired as well by a book called The Great CEO Within by Matt Moshry,
Mm.
or Mockery. I'm not actually quite sure how to pronounce that. And been corrected both ways. And Matt, if you're listening, I'd love to know how to pronounce your last name. Um, and, I originally read that book as a Google Doc that was circulating on the internet however many years ago. And I was like, what a fantastic resource. I was an entrepreneur starting a company. It was just concise, consolidated. I couldn't do everything, but, it was just very helpful. And I immediately bought the paperback and it was sitting on my desk for years. And I was like, my goal and my aspiration was to produce something equally as useful, but with a bit more of a technical angle. And so, I don't think I've lived quite up to Matt's bar, but hopefully I've gotten, at least in the ballpark. And it's been helpful to a handful of people. I think as far as, working with people individually, it's, to come to a final strategy for how to execute something as a leader. You're living in a world of ambiguity, right? So having the framework sometimes is enough, right? Okay, these are, this is the recommended framework for how to think about tech debt. I'm going to choose this path and we're good. But often the framework isn't enough to have the level of confidence that you can project to your team to successfully execute. So I think that's a lot of where the coaching comes in. It's not that I'm necessarily just reading from the book to people. It's I've applied these frameworks many times. You're thinking about applying the framework. Let's work through what are the implications, right? So we're going to walk down this path. How is that going to play out with your team? Does that meet your goals or not? All right, let's explore other paths and really robustly think through and build confidence and conviction that things are moving in the right direction, or that they could move in the right direction.
Yeah. I think calling it handbook fits perfectly. Like it's meant to be there, be by your side, and pulled out when appropriate in a situation you may be stuck. And then I know when it comes to your coaching, you've heavily oriented yourself towards helping technical people refine their soft skills and strategy, like you were talking about there, because sometimes those pieces can just be missed. And, it's not necessarily a bad thing or something these folks have done wrong. It's just a muscle that maybe hasn't been used. And
That's
you're
exactly
the trainer to come and say, hey, soft skills and strategy is how you have this full picture.
It's leg day. People skip
Exactly.
leg day.
People skip it too much. So when you've met a CTO that has skipped too many leg days, to use that term, where do you start to kind of gauge where their soft skill or strategy mindset may be at to then know what areas to focus to help grow them?
I don't think there's one right starting place. It's usually you start with where they're at and where their business is at, right? So my first coaching session is almost always, how's the business doing, right? Before we can dig into where your skill areas that are opportunities for improvement, it's how's the business as a whole, right? How are sales? What's revenue like? What's the burn like? What are your big picture objectives? Where is the business crushing it? And where are you guys missing? Right. And it's through the lens of how the company as a whole is doing that we can identify the areas of individual work that will be most impactful on the business. That usually gets us to something pretty quickly in terms of, I can't scale my efforts well enough, or I think the company as a whole is not succeeding at recruiting, or, whatever the biggest fire happens to be. But I think generally as those conversations progress, what it turns into is, I didn't realize there was so much complexity to this decision, right? Or I didn't realize there was so much to learn about hiring, for example. There's a lot of solutions, a lot of problems in the people space, the soft skill space, that feel intuitive. But as it turns out, people problems are often not intuitive. And there's quite a bit of nuance and side effects and complexity and externalities that shows up that it's not insurmountable by any means. But if you try and do it yourself, you're going to accidentally step in a lot of these potholes. And so thinking about and pointing out all the potholes in advance allows you to just walk down the road without stepping in a pothole, right? Like it's not actually all that hard, but it does require a pretty broad awareness and a broad empathy and consideration for a lot of things that are not necessarily obvious and intuitive on day one. And so that's another reason why I think whether it's an executive coach or a mentor or an advisor, like thinking through strategy and people problems out loud is very helpful. Just to see the lay of land as your brain currently has it and put that out there. And so somebody can say, okay, you forgot to fill out this part of the map, right? Or, going back to our leg day, like you did your quads, now you got to do the glutes and hamstrings, right? I find a very productive process. And usually when you say to somebody, oh, your hamstrings are weak, and then they go and flex their leg and we go, oh, you know what? You're right. I need to do more squats or whatever it is.
Yeah, everybody has blind spots, and that's the benefit of a coaching relationship in general. You can build trust to be able to spot those without somebody being upset or, feelings hurt by it, and instead say, cool, okay, let's address it now. And how do we get better?
So. Yeah. It's all in service, of course, of helping the individual be the best leader they can, show up the best for their business, and bring something fun into the world.
Yeah. Now, you had a piece in your book too where you recommend for non-technical founders to create their one-page tech North Star. What usually is encompassed in that document to be able to help them communicate what they want to folks that are on the more technical side?
Yeah, I think it primarily comes down to there's this language barrier between folks who are in the code all day and people who speak business all day, right? And so these artifacts, and this is a problem that goes both ways, of course, is learning to speak to your audience, right?
Mm.
And so I think it is what I try and encourage tech leaders and non-tech leaders to do is forget everything you know about your respective domain, right? Forget all the technical nuance. I think it's easier to describe this from the technologist's perspective. Like forget about how many clusters you have and the programming languages and the frameworks and the load balancers, et cetera, right? You don't have any of that knowledge. The problem is whatever it is, the business, the technology can't scale today, right? And what is the business impact of whatever the technology thing is you're trying to communicate, right? And the business impact might be if we take on 10 new customers, their quality is going to go down, right? Or if we take on 10 new customers, our costs are going to get too high and we can't sustain it, whatever the impact is. And that's where you focus, right? What is the thing that my audience cares about? They care about profits, they care about costs, they care about scalability, whatever it is, and speak in that language. And you develop trust and empathy by using words in somebody else's head. I'm, personally in my spare time, I play with cars and airplanes. And so when somebody wants to communicate with me, they use a car analogy. I'm all excited, right? They're going to talk about technology in terms of horsepower. It's like, okay, I get it immediately. Rebekah, you and I were chatting before the show. You like shows, right? So if I make an analogy to something on Broadway, you're probably your eyes are going to light up. You're going to get that, right? And so just using the language of the audience, I think is the most important thing. And so it's challenging both directions, right? It's not something anybody gets right the first time, but you take some effort, some iteration, and it's a muscle to continue our workout analogies. It's a muscle that builds, right? But nobody bench presses 500 pounds on day one.
Now, when it comes to tech decision making, you have outlined really like 3 frameworks to approach it. I want to get your take. Straw man was the one that caught my attention the most, but what those 3 different frameworks look like and when it's appropriate to apply the right ones to a given situation.
Yeah. I find, there's some decisions that just for whatever reason you have a lot of trouble getting buy-in for or getting energy and input into. Some things come up and they're very controversial immediately and you have too much input, bike shedding and things like that. But there are other times where as a leader, you need to make some sort of decision with the team that impacts everybody, but maybe you're concerned about the mechanism to get to that decision. And so there's no one universal right answer. It's just a framework. I propose there's 3 different ways that happens. The leader just shows up and says, I solved it. Here's the answer. And hopefully everybody, is not violently upset by whatever that answer is, and you can move forward. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the leader shows up with nothing and sort of forces people to spend time via a meeting or whatever it is. Let's co-develop the solution. Perhaps it's a group, it's a workshop, whatever it is. Let's put a whole bunch of everybody's time into this to come up with an answer. And obviously, those 2 solutions are very different in terms of the time they take and the amount of buy-in that you get as a result. Right? The independent model presumably is faster. You just develop one single solution. There's only you. Nobody else had to spend time in a group meeting. But the flip side, of course, is that may not be well accepted by the team. They didn't buy in. They didn't contribute. And so they may or may not be eager and excited to execute on whatever the strategy is. And the flip side, of course, the co-development model has the opposite problems, right? It's very expensive to develop, but best case scenario, everybody really understands the whys and is bought in and can execute well. And the magic is, as you called out, there is a middle ground, not appropriate for every situation, but I call it the straw man model. And in this case, the leader develops a half-baked, 2/3 baked option where you started to outline the shape of an answer. You started to document the trade-offs of the various approaches, and you've done some of the legwork, but you haven't necessarily made the difficult decision or expressed too strong an opinion yet. And then you bring that straw man, that half-worked solution to the team and say, all right, this is a bunch of the work. Using this as inspiration, where do your minds go? Right. And then you get some iteration on the thing that was already mostly done. And then you're getting, input, catching additional edge cases, and hopefully getting to a solution relatively efficiently from there. You get hopefully some of the buy-in from the co-development model, but without some of the inefficiency of just everybody developing a solution from scratch in an expensive group meeting. And I find just labeling these 3 different strategies is very helpful, very clarifying. And in any given day, you might execute more than one of them, or any given week. It's just tools in the tool belt and using them when it's most appropriate.
Yeah. I have a really cool company that we serve as a client of ours as well, who leaves time and space for hackathons from time to time. Because not every day can you be like, hey, everybody, what's your idea? Go play with something. But once a year, they give a week to the whole company with a backlog of problems saying, let's have a hackathon and see what we could solve for. And some of the best things kind of bubble to the top, and they can eventually be actually addressed by the business. But it's cool that they make space for it within this week so that it's not something that gets distracted throughout the year or something that becomes even a way down kind of scenario for folks where they really want to go solve a problem, but they don't have the time and space. So I think it's a great model that other companies, if you leave space for this kind of co-development framework and approach, it'll pay off, and it doesn't really have to be time consuming or expensive. Give it a week a year and just make sure it's time dedicated to that.
Yeah. I think it's, you say a week a year. In my head, I immediately do numbers. So it's like, okay, 2 to 3% of my development budget, right? Which, very reasonable to spend on innovation, trying new ideas, adopting new frameworks, tools. Just want to, and I like the co-development as well, that it's all done at the same time, right? Like, what better way to foster ideas than make sure that when people are doing their hack week or whatever, it's at the same time. And so you get that cross-pollination and people can contribute and help each other. And you get generate a lot of forward momentum that way.
Well, Zach, I've loved learning about the work you're doing at Gruntwork, more about your book and how you're impacting the industry as a whole by your coaching. But I have one final question for you, and it's around principles. And I'm curious, what is the guiding principle that you've lived by to be successful in business?
My guiding principle is that I really enjoy technology. I've just sort of been I'm a geek. I have a Raspberry Pi here and there doing all these kinds of things, and technology is fun. But when it comes to business, it's actually not about the technology, right? The technology is a means to some sort of end. And trying to keep both those things in mind is the challenge of the technical leader, right? Have fun with the technology, enjoy and advance the intellectual part, but it always has to be linked to what is the results we're trying to achieve. What's the value we're delivering to customers? What does the business need with this technology? And keeping that front in mind in every meeting and every scenario, that we're lucky and we should be we should have gratitude that what we do is so satisfying, it's so creative, and that we need to remember to constantly link that back to what does the end user actually want? How are we moving the needle forwards for our users and delivering for the business?
That's great. Sounds like you come from a lot of experience on that take, and I absolutely love it.
You go the wrong way a couple times and the business reminds you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Zach, you've had so much great to share with us. I've really loved the conversation, and I'm excited to keep tabs on what you do more within the AWS ecosystem and even the cloud ecosystem as a whole. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Rebekah. It's been my pleasure.
We'll talk again soon.